How can we understand why the elite operate the way they do?
I think a good question for people who are interested in how cultures work is how do elites come to be elite and how do elites maintain and their hold on power and their nature as elites. Most people don't think about these things. They obviously understand things like monarchy and aristocracy, where the elites are very self identified and obvious and have titles and so on and so forth. And in America, they have this idea, not inaccurately, that if you work hard and apply yourself, you can kind of achieve and reach high levels. But that also doesn't explain or doesn't take into account what extent elites self identify as such and provide mechanism in place to make sure their view of culture is what is promulgated across the generation. And this has been going on, I think conservatives are oblivious to this, for over a century. This started with, in Britain, the Fabian Society, in America with the American Economic Association, where there was this conscious attempt to seize the universities and have them proselytize the youth of the nation in order to spread certain ideas and to maintain a certain American, or in that case, British cultural identity, which is often at odds with basic human decency.
What is the end result of our future politicians consuming the same elite narrative?
I think often the politicians are not the leaders, but they're the last of the leg. They're the ones who are kind of implementing things, but at that point, it's a fait accompli in a sense. So you have the ideas that are starting at the university level, and then universities teach those who are going to become politicians. Often those become lawyers first. It also educates those who are going to become journalists and other opinion makers, entertainment to some extent as well, though no, obviously not everyone in entertainment has gone through the university system. So in the same way that if I were a McDonald's employee, and if I make French fries in San Francisco, and if I make French fries in Maine, that McDonald's French fry is going to pretty much be identical. Other countries will have little twists for regional differences, but if I go to McDonald's in most places, I'm going to have all over the world a recognizable menu. In the same way, all the products of our university system, and this is by design, are going to be largely homogenous, and they're going to be heavily urban, highly educated, marginally intelligent, and very much taken with their own sense of virtue and their own belief that they are meant to lead and rule society for the sake of everybody else. The end game for this kind of cultural ideology is utter world domination, which, as we know from reading comic books, whoever wants to control the world is probably not the good guy.
Do the elite simply want power, or do they want to make the world better?
I agree with Ayn Rand that Milton Friedman had a bit too much of Stalinism about him. This idea that people generally want what's best from everyone is really one of the most delusional American ideas there is. You know, one of the benefits of having been raised in a Russian household is I was never taught for 1 second that everyone, let alone most people, genuinely want what's best for me and my family. This is nonsensical because if you look at how many people treat their own families, the idea that 100% of them are trying to do what's best for everybody in their own home is ridiculous. Then when you apply it to strangers, it becomes even more absurd. What COVID, for example, taught us with, blinding truth is that when people who are unempowered are given an opportunity to assert dominance over others, they'll be more than happy to do that. And the motivations for most people isn't some vague, I want to do good, but it's some sense of, I want to increase my status or have a sense of power. So I think it would behoove people to study a little bit of evolutionary psychology, which really kind of motivates how human beings, being animals, and I don't mean that in a slur, are motivated.
Are institutions conspiratorial by nature?
Conspiracy is one of those words that's used to allow people not to have to think any further about a given subject. So most people would say, understandably, that a conspiracy theory is on its face, if not false, at least highly dubious. But if you ask, I think, a rational person, do you think it's the case that there exist very powerful elites who operate internationally, whose loyalties are far more to themselves and their status and their sense of power than to their native countries or their communities, I don't think it's very controversial at all to say, of course, that's the case. Well, that is a conspiracy. It's just a conspiracy that one would not use that term because, again, that term has become culturally loaded. Let me give another obvious example.
Yeah.
Is the Supreme Court a conspiracy? Well, you have 9 people who secretly get behind closed doors, argue the law, and then would come out and issue their rulings on behalf of a given issue. Now, they're doing their work in secret. A lot of it's malevolent. Is it a conspiracy because we can identify them? Is it not a conspiracy because we know who they are or because we trust them? So the term is kind of an incoherent one by design.
How do we know who is worth listening to in this world of conspiracies?
Pizzagate aged far better than Russiagate. So if someone sat down and told you that it is absurd to believe that there is an international coalition of highly powerful people who sexually assault minors and pay good money for doing this, this would sound like a deranged conspiracy. Yet Jeffrey Epstein is dead. There's a track record that's a mile long, which no one has apparently seen. And I would also point out that not one person, they went to Epstein's house, they raided his records, and as a consequence of this, not one single person has been arrested. That is something that most people don't think about because the corporate media doesn't want to talk about it. But if you sit down for 1 second, you ask yourself, how has this been the case? Whereas for 4 years, or 3 maybe, we had a constant drumbeat that there is some kind of collusion between then candidate or President Trump and the Putin administration. Nothing came to light other than the fact that Russia bought some Facebook ads. So that is a good example of how we are taught by corporate media outlets that things that are so outrageous and so beyond the pale and things that the average person would regard as completely unthinkable are on its face, therefore untrue, when in fact, if you sit down and just look for a little bit of time, you'll realize, if anything, it's understated. And here's an example that is not in dispute. In 1968, the war in Vietnam wasn't going well, and this boded poorly for Lyndon Johnson's re-election campaign. So as a consequence of this, Lyndon Johnson increased bombings in Vietnam, which inevitably would mean more dead Vietnamese civilians and more dead American soldiers. So in order to maintain his job, Lyndon Johnson had no problem killing very many people. Now, if I tell you that someone, in order to maintain his job, has no problem killing lots of people, you would think this is a comic book monster, where in fact this is indisputably an aspect of American history.
If you like this clip, we've got so much more where that came from, so be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss our new videos as they come out each week.